The marble floors of Carter National Bank sparkled under the morning sun. People in shiny shoes clicked across the floor, their phones pressed to their ears. A fountain gurgled quietly in the center of the room, and soft music played from hidden speakers. Everything felt polished, fancy, and important. Then the front doors opened with a hiss, and a man walked in. He was tall, with deep brown skin and short salt and pepper hair. He wore a faded brown suit that looked like it had been hanging in a closet for years. His shoes were scuffed. He held a worn folder in one hand and walked with slow, steady steps. Heads turned immediately. A mother in high heels nudged her son. "Stay close," she whispered. A businessman raised his eyebrows and whispered to the man next to him. "Lost, maybe?" The guards near the door straightened and watched carefully. A young girl stared, blinking, but the man didn't flinch. He walked straight through the crowd, eyes calm and focused, as if he had done this 1,000 times. The space around him seemed to grow quiet. Even the music felt softer as he passed. People stepped aside, giving him confused looks, some unsure, others unkind. He finally reached the front desk and stood patiently in line. The teller behind the counter glanced up, then looked back down quickly. But something about him was different. Not just his suit or his shoes, something in his eyes, like he had a secret no one knew. A man in line whispered, "He doesn't belong here." Another chuckled. Maybe he thought this was the post office. A few people laughed quietly. Still, the man said nothing. When it was his turn, he took one quiet breath and stepped forward. "Good morning," he said politely, his voice deep and calm. "I'd like to open an account." The teller blinked, clearly surprised. She stared at him for a moment, then slowly leaned forward. A smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth. The moment of truth had just begun, and no one in that building had the slightest idea who he really was. The teller leaned on the counter, her eyes flicking from the man's old suit to his worn shoes. She didn't even try to hide the look on her face. Half smirk, half disbelief. "You want to open an account?" she repeated, like she hadn't heard him right the first time. "Yes," the man said calmly, setting his folder on the counter. "Please." The teller raised one eyebrow. "Do you even have the minimum balance?" The words came out sharp, loud enough that everyone nearby could hear. A few heads turned. One woman's mouth dropped open. A teenage boy in line chuckled and whispered something to his friend. The man didn't react. He opened the folder and gently slid it forward. "I believe I have what's required." The teller didn't even look at the papers. Instead, she crossed her arms and tilted her head. "This is a high-end bank," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "We don't just hand out accounts to anyone. Maybe try somewhere else, like a corner check cashing store." A security guard standing nearby snorted with laughter. The two women behind the man exchanged amused glances. Someone muttered, "This should be good." Still, the man stood tall. His eyes were steady, his voice never rising. "I'd still like to open an account here. This location in particular." The teller rolled her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, clearly not sorry at all. "But I don't think this is the place for you." The man nodded once. "In that case, he said, "may I speak to the manager?" The teller looked surprised for a moment, then annoyed. "Fine," she said, standing up, "but don't expect anything different." As she walked away, she glanced back over her shoulder and whispered something to the guard, who laughed again. The teller disappeared into the back office, still smirking. The man remained at the counter, hands folded over the folder, quiet and still. He didn't flinch. He didn't frown. If anything, he almost smiled, because the game was just getting started. A few minutes later, the branch manager walked out of his office with a big fake smile. He wore a navy blue suit with a gold name tag and shiny cufflinks. His hair was slicked back like he was in a movie. He shook hands with important customers and gave the staff little nods like he was the king of the bank. When he reached the front desk and saw the man waiting there, his smile faded just a little. "You asked to see me?" he said, his voice tight but polite. "Yes," the man replied, stepping forward. "I'd like to open an account." The manager's eyes scanned him from head to toe. He noticed the wrinkled suit, the scuffed shoes, the old folder. He didn't hide his reaction. "We have different types of accounts," he said slowly, like he was talking to someone who didn't understand English well. "Most of our clients have significant funds." The man nodded. "I have what's needed." The manager chuckled under his breath. I'm sure you do, but this branch is selective. We serve a very specific type of customer. And what type is that? The man asked quietly. The manager leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Let's just say our clients wear different shoes and drive different cars. There was a long pause. I see, the man said. So this branch doesn't allow people like me? I didn't say that, the manager replied, quickly straightening his tie. I'm just saying, you might feel more comfortable at a different location. I prefer this one, the man said. The manager shook his head and gave a short, awkward laugh. Sir, I think we're done here. We have other customers to help. The man nodded and picked up his folder. As he turned to leave, he stopped and looked back one last time. Out of curiosity, he asked, who owns this bank? The manager laughed. Not someone you'd ever meet. Understood, the man said with a small, almost knowing smile. Then he walked out of the building, calm, proud, and completely unfazed. No one in that bank had a clue, but they were about to find out. Outside, the man stepped onto the sidewalk, the sound of his shoes clicking against the pavement. A sleek black car with tinted windows was waiting for him by the curb. The driver, a tall man in a dark suit, opened the door without a word. The man nodded, and without a single glance back at the bank, he slid inside. The door shut softly behind him. Inside the car, the atmosphere was quiet but intense. The driver adjusted the rearview mirror and glanced in the man's direction. But the man didn't look back. His eyes were steady, his hands folded neatly in his lap. The car pulled away from the curb, smoothly blending into the flow of traffic. The bank's large glass windows seemed to watch him as he passed, but he didn't pay them any mind. He was already miles away from the cold reception he'd received moments earlier. At the bank, the staff was still buzzing. The teller who had mocked him now stood near the coffee machine, fidgeting nervously. That guy, he's probably got a few dollars, but... She trailed off, unsure what to say next. I don't know. Maybe he was just visiting. The manager stood by the window, staring out as if he was trying to figure something out. That car, he muttered. It looked official. The other staff members gathered around him. What do you mean? One asked. I don't know, the manager replied, shaking his head slowly. Something felt off, but it's not like we can just start asking questions about every guy who walks in here, right? I don't know, the teller said again, her voice uncertain. He didn't seem like the type of person we get in here. The manager turned away from the window. Forget it. He's gone, right? Probably a one-off situation. He sounded less confident now. The staff exchanged uneasy glances. But in the back of their minds, something didn't add up. They hadn't seen the last of that man, and neither had the bank. They just didn't know it yet. AMA staff members in neat uniforms filed into the lobby, adjusting their ties and smoothing their hair, trying to look as professional as possible. The hum of chatter filled the air as employees prepared for the busy day ahead. But then, just as the clock struck 9 a.m., something unusual happened. An email popped up on every computer screen at the bank. It was short, direct, and completely unexpected. Subject, CEO visit, prepare accordingly. The email contained just one line. The CEO of Carter National Bank will be visiting our branch today. Please make sure everything is in order. A ripple of confusion swept through the room. The CEO? The owner? Everyone knew the CEO was a mysterious figure, someone whose name was rarely spoken and whose face was never seen. Is this a joke? One teller whispered, staring at the screen. Why would the CEO come here? No idea, the manager muttered, his voice tight with uncertainty. But I've heard rumors. He doesn't do this. He doesn't visit branches like this. Everyone scrambled. Staff members checked their uniforms. The tellers straightened their stations. The floor was wiped down again. Even the plants in the corner were dusted one more time. The manager barked orders, trying to keep calm. Get the files in order. Look busy. We want to impress him. He rubbed his hands together, clearly nervous. This could be our big chance. As the minutes ticked by, more whispers floated through the bank. What if he doesn't like our branch? One employee asked. What if he sees the mess we made with that man yesterday? The manager was sweating now, pacing back and forth. It'll be fine. We just need to look presentable. The CEO will be impressed with our work. Just stay calm. But deep down, the manager knew something was off. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this visit. The door opened at exactly 9:30 a.m. A sleek black car rolled to a stop outside, and all eyes turned to the front window. The man from yesterday stepped out. But this time, he wasn't in an old suit. He was wearing a perfectly tailored navy blue suit. His shoes shined to perfection. He carried a leather briefcase and walked confidently toward the entrance. The door to Carter National Bank slid open with a soft whoosh, and in walked the same man from yesterday. But today, there was no mistaking him for someone out of place. He wasn't wearing the old wrinkled suit or scuffed shoes. Today, he was dressed in a sharp, tailored navy blue suit, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. He walked with the kind of confidence that made every person in the bank pause and look up. Tellers froze mid-sentence. The manager stopped pacing, his mouth slightly agape. The usual hum of the bank came to a sudden halt as the man made his way across the lobby, every step echoing in the silence. His eyes were calm, his posture straight. He didn't glance at anyone, didn't seem to notice the stares. He simply walked as though he owned the place, because, as it turned out, he did. The staff watched, wide-eyed, as he crossed the lobby and headed straight toward the front desk. He was the same man, yet he was someone completely different. "Is this a joke?" The teller who had mocked him the day before whispered to a coworker, her voice shaky. "What's going on? Is he some sort of guest?" The manager stepped forward, clearly flustered, but trying to regain control. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice low but polite. "Can I help you?" The man didn't even glance at the manager. He continued his path toward the front desk, as if nothing had changed. The staff felt a wave of nervous energy ripple through the room. When the man finally reached the front desk, he turned to face the employees. He didn't smile, but his eyes sparkled with something unreadable. The same teller from the day before looked like she might faint. Her face was pale, and she stood stiff as a board, trying to process what was happening. A few seconds of awkward silence passed before the man spoke. "I believe there's a meeting I'm expected to attend," he said in a calm voice, his gaze moving around the room. "Please inform the team. I'll be taking a tour of the branch today." The teller opened her mouth to speak but found no words. The manager cleared his throat and managed a weak nod. "Of course, will let everyone know." As the man walked past them, his leather briefcase in hand, the realization hit all at once. He wasn't just some visitor. He was someone important, someone they had seriously underestimated. A few moments later, the bank was buzzing with nervous energy. Staff members scrambled to adjust their appearance, straighten their desks, and pretend that everything was perfectly normal. But inside, they were all wondering the same thing. Who is this man? The man, Elijah Carter, walked calmly through the bank, glancing briefly at each employee he passed. His footsteps echoed through the lobby, and a hush fell over everyone as they realized something extraordinary was happening. The employees had no idea who he really was, but they could sense that he was more than just a wealthy customer or an important visitor. There was something in his presence, something that made their stomachs tighten. Elijah continued his walk through the bank, his eyes flicking over the marble floors, the polished counters, the gleaming glass walls. He seemed to be examining every detail, as if he had seen it all before. Finally, he made his way toward the manager, who stood nervously by the windows, wringing his hands. "Mr. Carter," the manager stammered, clearly taken aback by the man's sudden appearance. I wasn't expecting you." Elijah smiled faintly. "No, you weren't." The manager fidgeted, not sure whether to apologize or explain. "I'm sorry about earlier, Mr. Carter. It's just that, well, you don't look like the usual kind of customer we get here." Elijah didn't respond immediately. He just studied the manager with a cool, calculating gaze. The man felt as though Elijah could see right through him, as if his every thought was laid bare. Finally, Elijah spoke. "I'm sure you've heard of me. My name is Elijah Carter, and I am the CEO of this bank." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one in the room could breathe. The manager blinked, stunned, unable to comprehend what he had just heard. His eyes darted toward the teller who had mocked Elijah earlier. She froze, wide-eyed, her face flushed with embarrassment. You're the CEO?" The manager whispered, his voice cracking slightly. Elijah nodded. That's right. A shocked silence enveloped the room. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and the staff began to exchange glances, their disbelief growing by the second. The manager stood there, mouth open, unable to process the information Elijah had just given him. He tried to speak, but could only manage a weak stammering. You're really the CEO? Elijah nodded, his face serious but calm. Yes, I am. For a moment, the room was completely still. Every employee was frozen in place, as though they couldn't quite believe what was happening. The woman who had mocked him the day before, the teller, now looked like she might collapse. Her face was pale, her mouth dry. She hadn't expected the man she had laughed at, who she'd assumed was nothing more than a poor visitor, was the one in charge of everything. Elijah took a slow step toward the counter, his leather briefcase clicking softly against the marble floor. He didn't seem angry, but there was something commanding in his presence that made the staff shuffle nervously. Elijah's voice was soft but firm as he addressed the group. I came here yesterday to see how customers are treated. I wanted to see what kind of environment you create for the people who walk through those doors. The employees looked at each other, unsure of what to say. Some of them started to shift uncomfortably. The teller who had mocked him stood rooted to the spot, guilt written all over her face. You laughed at me yesterday, Elijah continued, his eyes steady on the teller. You assumed I didn't belong here, based on nothing but the clothes I was wearing. But I'll tell you this, I have more power than you can imagine, and the bank you work for is built on something much stronger than appearance or status. The teller swallowed hard. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words got caught in her throat. The manager nervously adjusted his tie. I've been treated this way my whole life, Elijah went on, his voice growing more intense. Judged for things I can't control, my skin, my clothes, my background, and this bank, of all places, should know better. I want you to understand something. Respect isn't about what someone looks like. It's about how you treat them. The room was eerily quiet. Elijah's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. The employees were now acutely aware of the gravity of the situation, and their faces reflected shame and discomfort. They had no idea the man they had mocked was the very person who held the keys to the bank and its future. The next few days were a blur of tension at Carter National Bank. The staff was on edge, constantly looking over their shoulders, wondering when Elijah Carter would return. The once bustling atmosphere of the bank now seemed stifled, as if everyone was walking on eggshells. The manager, still shaken by Elijah's visit, held impromptu meetings with the staff, repeating the same mantra. We must respect every customer, no matter what. But the words felt hollow to him now, knowing he had failed in the most important way possible. How could he expect his team to follow these new rules when he himself had been the first to judge Elijah? The teller who had mocked Elijah spent hours in the break room, staring at her phone, trying to figure out how she had gotten it so wrong. She'd heard whispers about Elijah's true identity, how he was not just the CEO, but also the founder of the bank she had worked for all these years. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, suffocating her with guilt. She didn't know if she could ever look Elijah in the eye again, but she knew one thing for certain: she had a lot to make up for. On the fourth day after Elijah's visit, the door to the bank opened at exactly 9 a.m., just as it always did. But this time, the staff froze when they saw him standing there, tall and confident, just as he had been before. Elijah Carter was back. Without a word, he walked into the bank, his eyes scanning the room. The staff immediately stood up straighter, their faces flushed with nervousness. Elijah didn't say a word to anyone as he made his way to the counter. This time there was no mocking, no eye-rolling, only nervous glances, hoping he wouldn't ask about the previous days. The manager stepped forward, clearing his throat. Mr. Carter, we're ready for your visit today, he said, though his voice cracked. Elijah paused and turned to face the manager, his expression unreadable. You've learned your lesson, haven't you? He asked quietly, his gaze steady. The manager nodded quickly. Yes, sir. We've all learned a lot, and we're ready to show it. Elijah's lips curved into a small smile. Good, because everyone here deserves to be treated with respect, not just because of their appearance, but because of who they are inside. Remember that. With one last look at the team, Elijah turned and left the bank, just as quietly as he had come in. But this time, there was a sense of finality to his visit, a clear message that would echo in the minds of every person in the room for a long time. The manager and the employees exchanged glances, a new understanding between them. The change had come, not just because of a visit from the CEO, but because they had realized the most important thing about their work. Respect wasn't just something to give, it was something they had to earn every single day. The next few days were a blur of tension at Carter National Bank. The staff was on edge, constantly looking over their shoulders, wondering when Elijah Carter would return. The once bustling atmosphere of the bank now seemed stifled, as if everyone was walking on eggshells. The manager, still shaken by Elijah's visit, held impromptu meetings with the staff, repeating the same mantra: "We must respect every customer no matter what." But the words felt hollow to him now, knowing he had failed in the most important way possible. How could he expect his team to follow these new rules when he, himself, had been the first to judge Elijah? The teller who had mocked Elijah spent hours in the break room, staring at her phone, trying to figure out how she had gotten it so wrong. She'd heard whispers about Elijah's true identity, how he was not just the CEO, but also the founder of the bank. The bank she had worked for all these years. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, suffocating her with guilt. She didn't know if she could ever look Elijah in the eye again, but she knew one thing for certain: she had a lot to make up for. On the fourth day after Elijah's visit, the door to the bank opened at exactly 9 a.m., just as it always did. But this time, the staff froze when they saw him standing there, tall and confident, just as he had been before. Elijah Carter was back. Without a word, he walked into the bank, his eyes scanning the room. The staff immediately stood up straighter, their faces flushed with nervousness. Elijah didn't say a word to anyone as he made his way to the counter. This time there was no mocking, no eye-rolling, only nervous glances, hoping he wouldn't ask about the previous days. The manager stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mr. Carter, we're ready for your visit today," he said, though his voice cracked. Elijah paused and turned to face the manager, his expression unreadable. "You've learned your lesson, haven't you?" he asked quietly, his gaze steady. The manager nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. We've all learned a lot, and we're ready to show it." Elijah's lips curved into a small smile. "Good, because everyone here deserves to be treated with respect, not just because of their appearance, but because of who they are inside. Remember that." With one last look at the team, Elijah turned and left the bank, just as quietly as he had come in. But this time, there was a sense of finality to his visit, a clear message that would echo in the minds of every person in the room for a long time. The manager and the employees exchanged glances, a new understanding between them. The change had come, not just because of a visit from the CEO, but because they had realized the most important thing about their work. Respect wasn't just something to give, it was something they had to earn every single day.